So Ellen was 17 years old and very sick. You see, she had been bitterly disappointed after October 22, 1844, which is a big date for Adventist at least, and some other people will know this as well. And she was quite disappointed because at that time they had thought Jesus was coming again. Well, as you probably know right now, we're in 2023, and that did not happen in 1844, or else we would not be here. But she was so disappointed, and she was already in frail health, that she became physically sick as well. So she was ill in spirit, and she was ill physically. And she was thinking about a friend of hers who had invited her to come to a meeting of believers in South Portland area. But she thought, I can't travel that far. I'm not in good health whatsoever. But she knew, I need the fellowship of like-minded believers. I need to be around people that believe what I believe. So she went. So a few days later, in December of that year, Ellen went to her friend's house, and with 3 other women there, they knelt down and they had a family worship. And while she was praying, some of you might recognize parts of this story, she felt the power of God resting upon her like she hadn't before, and she had her first vision. And in that vision, she was shown the Advent people traveling along to the New Jerusalem in a bright light, which the midnight cry behind them with Jesus himself leading the way before them. And after that vision, she had this prompting to share. But she didn't want to share. In fact, she got up and she ran out of the place. Did not even want to share that first vision. See, one of the things she was concerned about in sharing that vision was that there were going to be people that were going to be opposing it. And she didn't feel like she had the strength or energy to deal with people, questioning her about it. But she couldn't shake that feeling that God wanted her to share. And she knew that they were still looking for answers to what had happened. What had happened in 1844? Why were we so off? What had happened? And so she still just wasn't convinced, though. I don't want to do it. So when she ran away from that friend's home, she actually ended up going to another home, the home of Joseph Turner. And he was actually a leader in the Portland Adventist movement there. And he actually had encouraged her to turn around, go back, go share the vision. If God is asking you to go share the vision, go back and share this. Nope, didn't want to do it. She was wrestling. She was thinking about it. She was convicted for several days. Finally, as she went to another meeting, which took place in another believer's home, she finally thought about it. And she thought, okay, well, maybe. So she shared the vision. And she was given a second vision. And in it, she was shown in that second vision that she was going to face trials, oppositions. It was not going to be easy. Exactly what she was afraid of, the Lord was already telling her, this is not going to be an easy path. And she fought against that. She thought, And she even went so far as to pray, Lord, take this burden away from me, right? Pick somebody else, somebody who's better qualified, somebody who's better at this than I am. I'm not a preacher, I'm not a teacher, I'm whatever. But she kept hearing the words out of one of these visions, make known to others what I have revealed to you. She still couldn't do it then, though. So she continued to kind of keep to herself. She didn't want to go to any other meetings, right? Because at this point, right, every time she goes to a meeting, she's having a vision. She's feeling compelled to have to share these visions, and she doesn't want to do that, so she's avoiding it. But eventually, she is persuaded to go to another meeting with another friend. And at that time, those who are with her actually encourage her to accept this calling. They can see there's a heavy burden on her. And it's at that time that she finally prays with the people around her. And it seems like out of nowhere, she feels this, she says something like a ball of fire stuck right over her heart. And actually, she ends up collapsing. But she knows, as this is happening, that it's the presence of God. And at that moment, she knows, I need to surrender. And she finally surrenders to that calling and served faithfully for many, many, many years. And many of you know the beginning of the story. This is the famed, if you will, Ellen White, the beginnings of her story. I don't know how well you knew that, how hard she fought against at the very beginning to even accept the calling. And I thought that was a good place for us to start to recognize that God didn't pick Ellen because she was the bestest and greatest. He picked her. Now, at first she was a little hesitant, but he picked her because he knew that she was going to be willing. It took a little bit, right? He had to pursue her on that, but she had to be willing. Because here's the thing that I know about God. The basic principle of that is he will keep knocking, but he's not going to force you. And in fact, if you really truly shut that door, he'll say, fine, I'll leave you alone. So if she had been firm, I don't want to do it, we would probably never even know her name. Right? But God knew just a little bit more. He knew where he kind of worked the way in there. And I'm sure if you look at her writings and the books that we have from her, she never regretted making that decision. Ever regretted that decision. But she reminded me of another woman in the Bible. Another woman that typically you hear her story around Christmas time. And we tend to think of the story and just kind of, we hear it or we get a little scared sometimes because we hear this, because in other places sometimes this woman is given a little too much credit for things. Don't worry, we'll kind of try to put this in perspective. And you know this story very well too. And in fact, here's kind of a timeline of it. Those of you who know the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus, she has kind of a brief moment in there. And actually the beginning of her story kind of reads like something off of some kind of movie, right? This angel shows up, tells her, hey, by the way, you're going to be pregnant with the Messiah. She's like, I'm a virgin. How is this supposed to happen? Okay, I guess that's what we're going to do. She goes and visited her relative Elizabeth, who's pregnant with what becomes John the Baptist. And when she shows up, she's like, oh, wow, you're going to have the Messiah. She returns home very pregnant at that point, at least starting to show, if you will. You can only imagine, we all live in a small town, what words were said, and they all knew the situation. Her fiancé had to be convinced to marry her because he was going to quietly divorce her. And then lo and behold, as they're trying to figure this all out, there comes this decree and they get to go to Bethlehem. They arrive at Bethlehem. Ta-da, the Messiah is born. I mean, think about that story. When you just think of it in that's a pretty wild ride there. And yet, underneath this story, there is a woman similar to Ellen who had to make a decision about the call on on her heart from God. So let's take a quick look at a couple of segments here. If we look at Luke 1, we're going to slow down the story. I'm sure most of you know this as the Christmas story. We're not at Christmas at this point. We're getting a little ahead this year. But also even in the story, it's not necessarily Christmas time where their Christmas didn't exist then. But here we have Luke chapter 1, verse 26. Here's our first introduction to Mary, who's going to become the mother of our Messiah. And it says this, in the 6th month. 6th month to what? Previous story is talking about her relative Elizabeth, who she does go and visit. But previously it's talking about Elizabeth and Zachariah, who also are going to have a miracle child in a different way. And, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, to a town in Galilee, to a virgin, pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. So we get her name, and we get a lot of detail here. Who is this person? This is probably a young woman. If you try to look up and be like, how old they think she was, she could have been anywhere from 14 to maybe 18. I mean, she's a teenager or so. But in that time frame, it was acceptable to be pledged to be married. So it wasn't out of their norm. But she was a young woman here. And what do we know about her right off the bat? She lives in Nazareth. It's not a really big, well-known town. It's in the region of Galilee. She's a virgin, and she's pledged to be married. Right? Things are looking pretty good. She's pledged to be married. She's going along her path. But then this angel comes in and it interrupts all this with this in verse 28. Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. And Mary, like so many of us, is greatly troubled at the words. Right? When the Lord shows up, we tend to be, right? Because we're sinful human beings in the presence of a mighty God and a sinless God. And she wonders what kind of greeting this is going to be. But the angel says to her, "Don't be afraid. Mary, you have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end." Now notice the angel drops very coveted words here. There were many women in Israel who were hoping to hear words that they would be the mother of the Messiah. This was a great hope for the people. And Mary finally gets, I'm sure she was not expecting this, gets and hears these words, and the one thing she asks, "How will this be? Since I'm a virgin." She understands, she's like, I'm not married yet, so, how is a kid going to arrive here? The angel basically tells her, God's going to figure it out, right? The Holy Spirit's going to come upon you, overshadow you. And he even tells her about her relative Elizabeth. And notice after that one technical question, like, how are you going to make this work, Lord? In verse 38, she just says, "I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said." And the angel left her. I want you to think about how quickly that dialogue happens here. The angel gives her the message. She asks kind of one question. Obviously, the angel's not offended by the question. She's not even saying, like, I'm not going to do this. She doesn't show any sign of, like, not pick me. She's just like, I don't quite understand the technicalities of this. The angel answers the best he can. We can't understand how this is all going to work, but I'll give you the best I can. And all she answers is, okay, I'm willing. I don't know if at that moment, given what we know about her situation, if she understood the full ramifications of what she was committing herself to. What we do know is that she quickly gets up. It doesn't give us the exact time frame, but she quickly gets up and goes to see this relative Elizabeth, right? She's got news. She's pregnant now. She's got all the stuff she's got to figure out, right? She's not married yet. I don't even want to imagine how she's going to explain this to her parents, right? How are you going to explain this to the townspeople? These aren't really big towns. I've been and seen Nazareth, some of the ruins of the earlier town. It's not very big. It's not a very big place. So people like Wrangell are going to know people's business. It's going to be hard to hide that pretty soon, right? So it makes sense if she was like, get out of town for a little bit. She gets out of town and she's actually greatly encouraged, right? When she goes to see Elizabeth, who is pregnant with John the Baptist, is like, wow, you're carrying the Messiah, right? No condemnation from this woman. No condemnation for her. No, like, oh, this is gonna be bad. You're gonna be in trouble. She recognizes this for what it is. This is a miracle of God. This is amazing. And Mary, in verse 46, watch this song that she sings after this, right? She's amazed. She's hanging out with her relatives here, and she says, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones. He has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things. He has sent the rich away. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, even as he said to our fathers." She's facing some tough odds here, and yet she is able to sing and say, "I am amazed at what you are doing, Lord." Right? And how you exalt the humble. She recognizes, I'm kind of nobody here. I'm just this young woman from Nazareth, a nobody town, nobody really knows an awful lot about. And yet you have chosen me of all people, right? To be a part of your plan to deliver your people. God knew what he was doing when he picked Mary. It was a woman who had an idea, a young woman that had an idea of, she wasn't exalting herself here. She wasn't saying, oh, Mary's so great that she's given this honor and privilege. She goes, God is so wonderful that he's using somebody like me, so humble, right? She's not exalting herself. And I want to take us over to the homeward journey, over in Matthew 1, when she returns home or thereabouts, it doesn't tell us how her fiance, Joseph, finds out that she's pregnant. We just know that he does. And there's a million ways that he could have found out, right? We know this because in Matthew 1:18, Joseph, who is thinking about, what am I going to do here? Who, by the way, Joseph is a very honorable man, as we see here, because he had right to have her even stoned for what had happened, or what he thought had happened, maybe is a better way to say that. But he's thinking in his head, I'm going to quietly, we'll just cut this off, and I don't want to cause a bigger scene, etc. So it takes an angel to come to Joseph. This is in Matthew 1:18 and 25. And it says, actually, I'm going to go to 19, because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man. Look at that. Right off the bat, what we learn about him is he's a good man. And he doesn't want to expose her to public disgrace. Well, she's already got to be but he's tried not to make it worse. So he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And she will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. We could read further on, but I'm going to pause there. It wasn't just Mary that was involved in this. Joseph had a role too, and he had to be willing to go through this as well, right? He had to be willing and believe when the angel came and said to him, Joseph, this is not what you think this is. This is the Messiah that she is carrying, and I need you to be a part of this together. I need parents for this child, for the Messiah, and I want you to be a part of this. Joseph was a willing heart as well. I mean, think about that. He could have easily have said, I'm done. I'm out of here. I don't want to do this. Are you kidding me? This is not real. It doesn't say he does any of that. He hears it, like we saw with Mary too. God knew what he was doing when he picked these folks. He hears it and he follows it. He takes it to heart and says, okay. He takes Mary in. Okay, she's going to be my wife. I believe this is what you said. But here's the main event. Let's go back over to Luke. The story doesn't leave us there. All right, there's a lot of turmoil going on up until this point. We've got, Mary pregnant. She's supposed to be engaged. She's got a fiance who's thinking he's going to divorce her. All of this stuff is going on. And yet here we go in Luke chapter 2. You guys know this. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. As if they didn't have enough going on, Caesar Augustus, in all his greatness, if you will, says, time for a census. Of course, this was a part of God's plan as well, because they need to get to Bethlehem, where the Messiah is to be born. And they live in Nazareth, right? And they don't travel like we do these days all over the place and just make a little, I'm just going to go over on vacation in Bethlehem or something like that. He's got to get them there somehow. They're not going to just randomly go over there. God decides to use, in this case, this Caesar Augustus, to get them to go to Bethlehem. And they arrive in Bethlehem, and you know the story. But I want us to think about this from a slightly different perspective. You know the story that they get there. They go. Mary is now very pregnant when they go. Those of you who have been moms can probably sympathize with this if you did any traveling in your later pregnancies. Having a sister currently who's pregnant and traveling with her not in the later pregnancy, I can have a little empathy for what that took for her to do that. But those of you who have been there, you'll understand that. I'm sure it was not, number one, it wasn't comfortable. They're not in a car. Probably quite bumpy. And she gets there, and it is so full, because Bethlehem also is not a huge town at that point, but all these people got to come back in. It's so full, and it's so bad that, think about this. Any normal person's going to look at it and go this is a very pregnant lady. We need to find a spot for her. But it's so full, they cannot find a spot for a 9-month pregnant lady. And I don't think it's because anybody's we don't like pregnant women and we don't care about you, blah, blah. I think they're literally we don't know where to put you. We have so many people. Right? But somebody takes compassion on it, and you all know that there's no room in the inn, so they end up in a barn. And they end up with the Messiah being born. It says, and she gave birth to him, her firstborn. This is chapter 2 of Luke 7. She wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. And this, folks, is kind of the end of what we see of Mary, and rightly so. From this point on, who do we see as we go forward in Luke? We see Jesus. We see this transition, and obviously it's not a fluke. The whole Bible, the whole New Testament is pointing towards Jesus. But I want you to think about the succession of this. Mary, who's a willing heart, Joseph, who's a willing heart here to be a part of this story, Messiah, who is born, the ultimate willing heart, if you think about that. I mean, he's a baby at that time, but what do we know about God? What do we know about what was the plan here to come in? He himself had to be willing to come down and to carry out this plan. And in fact, we know the basis of God's kingdom is love, right? God is love. We've all heard that. The basis of his kingdom is love. But it doesn't end there. Love needs something in order to grow. And love needs freedom, right? You can't have forced love. That's really kind of oxymoron. You can't do that. You have to have freedom in order to actually have love. And so in essence, God willingly, that's the nature of him, willingly came down. Willingly, out of his love, came down to provide us, let's flip this around again, freedom, right? What was that all about? To provide us freedom. He was the ultimate willing heart. I want to share with you a couple of verses too about a willing heart and what God is looking for when he's looking at our own hearts. There's just a couple of verses here. 1 Chronicles 28:9 says, and this is talking to Solomon, and you, Solomon, my son, know the Lord of your father and serve him with a whole heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. If you seek him, he will be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will cast you off. What does it say? A willing mind. 1 Chronicles 29:5 says, and for all the work to be done by craftsmen, this is another story, gold for the things of gold and silver for the things of silver. What is God asking? Who then will offer willingly, consecrating himself today to the Lord? Not who then is going to force, we're picking you. It says who will offer themselves willingly. 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, each one must give as he decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Now, we tend to hear that when somebody's looking for like money and we're trying to talk about this. But think about what the essence of this is saying. God's not asking for people to give out of force or give because they feel like they have to. He's saying, I want you to give because you are willing to, you want to. And then finally, Philippians 2:13, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So who is it that works in us to will that, to have that willingness? God himself. See, there's this basic principle here, and this is from Ellen White here, and she talks about that freedom that we are given. And she says this came from one of her letters. It says, as a redeemed, free moral agent, ransomed by an infinite price, God calls upon you to assert your liberty and employ your God-given powers as a free subject of the kingdom of heaven. How many times in there does it tell us we are free moral agents, right? Assert your liberty. You are a free subject of the kingdom of heaven. God is not looking for forceful subjects. The whole basis of his kingdom is about willingness because that is the essence of who God is. That is the essence of, we just said, what love is, what freedom. You can't have love without freedom. That is the essence of the kingdom. And finally, you guys know these verses, and this tells us a lot about God's heart towards us. And there's two verses. One, Ezekiel 36:26. We have heard this so many times, but God himself says he's going to give us a willing heart. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. There's more to that verse, but that piece right there, who's going to do this? It's not because you're going to do it. It's not because you're so great or I'm so great or whatever. God himself says, I will do this in you. You have to make a choice. That's the, if you want to call it the line, that's the line I choose for God to do this within me, because he's not going to force it on you. But if you're struggling, and I prayed this prayer recently because of the whole camp meeting thing. I'm not even really sure if I'm willing. Make me willing. He can do that too. Now, it sounds kind of funny to say make me willing, but you're giving him the opportunity. You're asking to be made willing. Because here's the thing. What does Revelation 3:20 say? We've seen this and we've heard this as well. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. God is not forcing his way in. He says, here I am standing at your door knocking. What's the one thing you got to do at that point if someone's knocking on the door? Yes. You can decide to leave them out there. You can. Maybe not very polite, but, I'm sure at some point we've all done that. Well, I'm not home. Hear the knock on the door. You can do that, and God will respect that. But he's saying if I knock on that door and you let me in, he says, I'm going to come in and I'm going to give you this new heart. I'm going to come in. I'm going to eat with you. I'm going to be with you, right? And you with me. The ultimate willing heart is Jesus. The ultimate willing heart is Jesus, who has come down as a baby, willingly dying for us for freedom, because he loves us. And our one thing we have to decide, folks, is whether we're going to open that door and let him in or not.